Joined from Sydney now by the host of Chris Smith Tonight. Chris Smith from the Gold Coast, host of the Front Page, the wonderful Peter Gleeson. I'm going to start with you, Gleeso. Look, I saw the BBC broadcast last night. Johnson's announcement, no holds barred, full independent inquiry into all the aspects of this pandemic. It will not be the last. I was there in government when we were dealing with an outbreak of Ebola in Africa, devastating consequences. If something like that came here, and we had the hapless sort of hotel quarantine and everything else we've got going on now, we'd be in all sorts of trouble. Surely, given the blood and treasure here, surely we deserve a Royal Commission.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it in your editorial. And both you, Peter Credlin, as a regular last year, and Chris Smith, who hosted the show on a number of occasions, I did a show that looked specifically at problems in the bush and the regions during the height of the pandemic. And I can tell you now, there is absolutely no doubt that the discrimination and the one-size-fits-all approach that didn't work in the bush and the regions had a massive impact on people in the regions and in country Australia. We saw in some parts of the country, particularly on the borders, where there was mass confusion around Albury, Wodonga, over in South Australia, farmers, their inability to bring in machinery. We also saw a situation in Queensland where the Premier said, our hospitals are just for Queenslanders, and we had critically ill people in northern New South Wales unable to come to the Gold Coast and, of course, Brisbane. The inconsistencies around the pandemic were extraordinary. We absolutely need a Royal Commission, just like Boris Johnson is doing in the UK. And I actually think we need a referendum. We need a referendum to ensure that the politicization of the pandemic by the states is never repeated, and that we have the Commonwealth, as we do in war, running the show.
Yeah, look, we have a national pandemic plan, and I want to know what was departed from the plan that was agreed back in 2019. And if out of a Royal Commission there are things that we've done well, lock them in the plan. If there's things we need to change, make those changes now. Have an appropriation of, series of committees to have it all agreed, get the legislative changes in. But you can't have emergency powers ran through a parliament with all sorts of deals done at 2 a.m. in the morning in Victoria. You can't have rules for Victorians different than rules for Queenslanders. You can't have all of this money, blood and treasure, as I said, 800 lives lost in Victoria from incompetence alone, and $1 trillion worth of debt. Governments don't get out of bed day in, day out without a bloody inquiry, and yet here they are, all of them, hiding under the bed, trying to get away from an inquiry into, I think, what is the biggest issue we've faced, like Johnson said, since the Second World War. It beggars belief, honestly. And then, Chris Smith, they announced in the budget papers, which I've picked up today, a whole raft of new public servants. Now, the coalition was elected. I was there, 2013, cutting the cost of government, bringing back the numbers of the public service to only what was required and necessary. But the budget's got the bubble growing out by another 5,000, up to Kevin Rudd's sort of numbers, 173,000 in terms of headcount overall, and this horrific cost of $88 billion, not million, billion dollars to fund the Australian public service. God help us.
God help us is a fantastic description, because what we have seen is that we are not in this together. Can we make a pact that we never ever use in commentary or in advertising?
I never used
slogan,
it.
We
I
are in
it.
this together, because it just should be cremated. 5,400 extra public servants. And this is what happens when you don't present a budget. They didn't present a budget this week. They presented another stimulus package, and that's what it was, to the degree of over $74 billion. It was a stimulus package. Someone has to roll out that stimulus package, and where do you go? You just put on more public servants, 5,400. We are not in this together.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I know the budget can be full of detail, and people at home can say, well, you know what? It doesn't really impact me. You know, it's the government's money, and it's always like this on both sides of politics. Let me tell you, it is your money, and nothing is clearer than some of the detail in the budget that have gone through. The spending and the revenue money, the money coming into government is coming more from ordinary people than it has in many, many years. 52 cents out of every dollar of tax revenue that Josh Frydenberg is spending is sourced, Gleeso, from the individual taxpayer. Right? Now, it was 46%, 46 cents in the dollar under Wayne Swan in the GFC, so it's worse now. This is not corporates paying this money. This is not windfall gains from government. This is ordinary mum and dad's tax revenue paying for all of this largesse. This is why how they spend our money matters.
Two things. Big government doesn't work. We see it in Queensland. I mean, the health department here in Queensland is an absolute disgrace. They haven't got a handle on anything. They've got more money coming in than any other department, and they've botched it. So that gives you an example of what big government does. That's crazy. But when it comes to the fact that we're being taxed, in some instances, 53 cents in the dollar, I think we're just behind Norway and just behind Sweden. I mean, right now, you know, in this country, those tranche 3 tax cuts that are in the budget for 23-24, unless they come in, and they must come in because they provide the economy with a natural stimulus. But you know, the Labor Party right now are looking at actually opposing that. Well, we'll wait and see what happens over the next 3 years.
Just quickly, I want to run through a couple of other things here before we go. Chris, we saw in the papers too, huge increase back to high levels of immigration, up to sort of 35,000 people 2024. This is in net migration terms, so this is the amount we will consume, 235,000. That's sort of Rudd levels again. It'll keep wages lower. It's an infrastructure worry, congestion worry, know all of that. But you've got the New South Wales government. First of all, people haven't been consulted about that, I might add. But the New South Wales government is now going to open up the doors without federal agreement to bring back international students. Now, I've got to ask you, I've got plenty of people in my family, young students at university. They are still not back on campus. They are doing everything remotely. So if Australian domestic students are going to university remotely, why on earth can't we still take international students but do it in the same way as we're treating our own?
Yeah, we shouldn't. I don't mind the fact that New South Wales does what it does very often in this pandemic, which is have a glass half full approach rather than a glass half empty. So think ahead, think what may happen, think of how we would quarantine these people, maybe in residence halls. There's plenty of accommodation in our tertiary institutions right around the country. I like the fact that New South Wales is thinking ahead because it is big economic dollars. But I agree with you, Peter, you can't put foreign students in front of our local people, and I hope that's not what Gladys Berejiklian has in mind. I hope there's a clear priority. I hope there's a queue and a proper queue. But we can quarantine these people successfully. Maybe not in other states and territories, but certainly in New South Wales. And, you know, you spoke before about the tax
hang on. Let me
just
jump in there, though. We have still got a lot of older people over the age of 50 and well into their 70s reluctant to use AstraZeneca. Now, they're not going to get a vaccine of their choice until such time as we get to the end of the year. And all the young people who are of lower risk, they get Pfizer or they get Moderna, which has now been ordered today. Older Australians get one choice, AstraZeneca, and only if there's anything left over are they going to get a choice of Pfizer. I think that's when we'll see a real lift if people have a choice in those vaccination numbers. Now, why on earth would you bring back international students from China and India and elsewhere until our most vulnerable are vaccinated?
I think you should, and I think you could, purely by saying no jab, no travel to Australia. This is what Alan Joyce said months and months ago. If you want to come to this country, you've got to start having the jab. And
but you can still carry it, mate. You can still carry it. This is the whole point.
There's very little data about carrying it and transmitting it.
There is very little data to say that it's not occurring, Chris. The only thing that the COVID jab will do is stop you getting the COVID infection in a sort of very mortal way. It'll make it a less, disastrous sort of infection. We don't know anything about the transmission and the way in which it can be moved around. That's an issue. And hotel quarantine's an issue.
But are we suggesting we wait until the end of 2022 before we open international borders or have foreign students come here? We've got to get on with it.
I don't know. I don't think we put our older Australians out there as cannon fodder. That's my strong view. Until such time as the older Australians, are vaccinated. Less concerned about those under 50.
But they're not
very concerned about our elderly. Otherwise, what was last year about, mate? What was last year all about? Well, we don't know that yet.
If they've got the jab, they're not passing on a virulent strain.
We don't know that yet, and I think that we can have these students.
The data at this stage doesn't point to that, though.
we can have these students on a Zoom call just like we have Aussie students on a university Zoom call. Anyway, just before we go, I want to get into this issue in Queensland, Gleeson. The police issue, the affirmative action drive by Queensland Police, it's all been exposed now by the corruption watchdog. Male applicants were booted out, overlooked. Female applicants got in, all basically on gender grounds. They had previously failed, these female applicants, psychological, physical assessments. They still got in. The blokes had passed the test, but they were out because of gender. This report has found as many as 200 meritorious men were shunned by recruiters as part of a policy that's been called woke nonsense by the police union. I don't suspect this has gone down well in Brisbane today.
Has not gone down one little bit well. And I can tell you now, Peter, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've been warning about this type of practice for some time. It's finally been, the whistle has been blown by the CCC. And I just really worry about the fact that we are in this diversity and gender equity and quota environment, and the woke leftists are starting to win. And here's an example where, you know, the allegation from the CCC is that the police commissioner directed that men who were more qualified than women not get the jobs. Now, look, you're at the top of your game as a woman, and you got there because you're very, very good at what you do. I mean, you know, it's an insult to women to think that they are put into positions where men are better qualified. And what it also does is it undermines the whole process, and it means that you're going to have these women who ultimately put into positions that they're not qualified for, and they fail spectacularly. Bell the cat here, the CCC, but unfortunately, the way we are at the moment, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to continue to happen because that's the environment we're in now.
And I must say to all those men and women who are railing against this news out of Queensland today, but still support quotas in politics, I think it's pretty hypocritical.
Exactly.
One and the same thing. Chris Smith, Peter Gleeson, thank you for your time.
Good to see you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.